Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our UCAT module. I suppose starting off, I would love to introduce you to sorry. He's a final year medical student at the University of Cambridge, and he's just come off the back of a research fellowship at Harvard University in the US. He's been teaching UCAT and has been tutoring with TMP for the past 4 years as well. He did score a 3/100 in his SAT as well. So he's quite a fantastic tutor to be hosting this, and we are very, very grateful for him. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom. Now, this webinar will be between 6 and 7 p.m. and Barak will probably answer them and finish the webinar around 6:45. So the questions will happen after that. It may stop a little bit earlier where you can answer questions, but for the time being, we've scheduled it for 6:45. Just so you're all aware, this webinar will be recorded and it will also be sent out to you in the next week or so.
Cool. Okay, hello everyone. Yeah, I'm Brack. Thank you for that introduction. So we'll be covering effectively top tips for the UCAT. We'll be looking at all the different sections, and some of the changes that have happened, and I suppose just a little signposter to some of the stuff that the medic portal has to offer you guys, and what we can do to help you all basically. So yeah, welcome from the medic portal. You can see, we've taught many medics. And we've been delivering UCAT prep in many schools over the years, and usually quite good reviews. And so we're definitely well placed to answer any questions that you may have about your upcoming UCAT and medical/dental journeys. So yeah, I mean, most of this is stuff that we've already covered, but this is me. I'm Barak. I'm a final year medic at Cambridge, and I sat the UCAT a long time ago now, so 7 years ago now. Back when it was the UKCAT, and there were a few more sections involved. But I've been tutoring it effectively since then, and so I've been keeping up with all the changes and everything that's been happening. Um, in terms of this cycle, so couple of things that you guys want to probably note down is 23rd of June, so quite soon is when you can begin to book your UCAT dates, and I would always recommend trying to book in as soon as you can, and then you can adjust the dates later on. So I would always recommend trying to get a slot wherever possible, and then adjusting it accordingly later. And then the 13th of July is when the first kind of testing availability is, and the 24th of September is the last possible day you can sit the exam this cycle, okay? So you've effectively got between the 13th of July and the 24th of September to sit the exam. And the nice thing is that the way that the UCAT works is that it's all electronic. It's all sat at your local kind of test center. So you can look at that on the UCAT website. But if you've all done, or if some of you will have done your driving theory tests, usually they're in the same sort of locations as those, and it's the same computers and it's the same rooms, and so that's what you can expect from it. And effectively, you can only sit the exam once per cycle. Okay, you can't sit the exam twice, and the idea is that if you turn up to the test center that day, then you are effectively saying that you are fit to test and that you're ready to go. And so that will be your one and only shot that cycle, okay? There are chances to reschedule, and so if you are feeling unwell or not up for it a couple of days before, then check the website and see if there's any availability. Obviously, there will be no availability beyond the 24th of September, and so make sure you sat it by then. Good. So this year, the UCAT test involves 4 sections. So that's your verbal reasoning, decision making, quantitative reasoning, and your situational judgment. As of last year, they've taken out the abstract reasoning section. And so now you've only got 3 sections, plus an SJT, which is a situational judgment. And they've kept the overall time for the exam the same. So it's about 2-hour exam. And these are the relevant timings for it. So ultimately, the exam is very time pressured. Okay, so your verbal reasoning, you have 22 minutes, decision making 37 minutes. Your QR section is 26, and your SJT there's 26. The most time pressured section is probably going to be your verbal reasoning, as you can see. And so, kind of coming up with different strategies and different approaches to maximize your time efficiency is really the way to go here. Okay. Um, for each of the sections, as you're sitting exam, you'll see that you'll have an additional minute of reading time. And that minute of reading time doesn't count towards that doesn't count towards the time to which you've been allocated to answer the questions here. Okay. And so if you're familiar with that, then actually you can kind of take that as a mini 1 minute rest between each station effectively. Okay, so moving on to the stations themselves, or the sections themselves. So verbal reasoning will be your first one that you sit. Um, Usually, with these sections, you will struggle to find the time to be able to read through the whole passage. And so really what you want to do is you want to focus on the question first. So for each passage, there'll usually be 4 questions. And so what you want to do is you want to read the question first, pick out really the keywords from that question and what that question is looking for. And then you can come back and then start skimming through and reading through that passage and effectively seeing the key bits and the relevant bits for you to pick out from the passage in order to be able to answer. Because if you do it the other way around and you read the passage in a lot of detail, then actually what you might find is that you may not have enough time to answer all 4 questions for that passage. A lot of the time, there will be what we call mitigating words versus definitive words. So in the passage, you might have something like always, or you might have something like definitely or without a doubt. Whereas then in the question, you might have something like maybe, sometimes, often, right? And you can see that those two things mean very different, they mean very different things, right? And so it's your kind of task and it's part of your responsibility to be able to pick out those differences between the passage itself and what the question is asking for, and noting that they're not necessarily the same. So this is just one of kind of many tricks that they like to use for this section that we can look at in more detail. If you look at the website, and there's a verbal reasoning guide you can look at there as well. And usually I like to say whenever you spot a keyword in the passage, I wouldn't say just read that keyword. I would always try and say read the sentence including the keyword, the sentence before it, as well as the sentence after it. And usually that's where you can hope to find your answers. Okay. So this is an example. And again, I'm gonna just give you a quick minute or so just to have a read through the question, try and pick out the keyword in the question, and then from there you should hopefully be able to try and see what the answer might be. Okay. I don't know if you can use the chat function, but once you've started to get answers, you can feel free to put them in the chat, and then I'll know when it's time to move on. Okay, so for this one, what you would have wanted to put down would have been can't tell. Okay, so if you look at the passage, again, we're trying to look for what the keywords are, right? And so you've always got, I'd always say numbers are a good way to start. So 52 would be a good one to look for, or I'd also be looking for maybe 57 varieties. Those would be my initial search terms. And so I'd be kind of looking through the passage for those terms to see if I can find them, right? Unfortunately, here you can't really find so you can find 57 varieties here, but you can't really find anything that states 52. Okay, and so although when you kind of read it in more detail, you can see that it tells us that Henry was born in 1844 and he coined the slogan 1896, which is roughly 52 years. We don't know the months or we don't know necessarily the origin of the slogan. And so in theory it could have only technically been 51, if that makes sense. And so although it's probably likely that it's 52, we can't be definite based on these 2 years of 1844 and 1896 that it was exactly 52 years apart. And so again, this is another way in which they kind of try and trick you. And so what they try and do is they'll try and trick you by effectively hiding those keywords or trying to make you come up and work out those keywords yourself. So in this scenario, you're looking for a difference of 52 as opposed to the actual number 52. Okay. So moving on to quantitative reasoning. So with quantitative reasoning, here really the key advice I can give you is to make sure that you know your mental maths really well. Okay, so I want you to make sure that you are very comfortable with your percentages, your ratios, converting between units. And I want you to be able to almost freely convert between percentages, fractions, and decimals. Um, so that you're able to pick out different tricks and you're able to do the maths without using the calculator. So there is a calculator that they do give you, and that calculator is a online calculator, and it's quite slow and very clunky. And so the issue with it is that it really takes up a lot of your time. And so that's what I would be worried about. And so I'd only ever really use it when it's absolutely essential. Wherever possible, I would try and do mental maths and utilize that wherever possible. So again, same thing. I would always read the question first and then go to the text because the question is going to tell you exactly what it is that you're looking for. And then you can use your answer options strategically. So if your answer options are really far apart, you might be able to estimate and round. And so by rounding numbers up or down, that should make your calculations easier and it will probably mean that you can do it in your head a lot easier. Whereas if the answer options are really, really close together and there's only kind of differences of decimals and things like that between them, then actually you might have to calculate those numbers exactly and you might have to use that calculator. Does that make sense? And so the other thing that they like to do is they like to do things like percentage changes. And so from that, I want you to be familiar with the formula. And so that's kind of new minus old over old, or the difference over the original times 100. And that's kind of the formula that you'd want to use. And again, you want to multiply it by 100, obviously, to get your percentage. Um, they also like to trick you with units. Okay, so grams versus kilograms, per person pricing versus overall pricing, all those sort of things are things that um, you'd want to be aware of, and you'd want to be able to kind of adjust. Okay, and yeah, so they kind of try and trick you out there, and that's something that you always want to try and spot. Again, there's a lot more detail on the Medical Portal website, and there's a quantitative reasoning guide that you can look at as well. Okay, so here's an example of a question that you can have a go at, and you'll hopefully see what I mean. So again, take a minute just to have a look at this question, and then we can talk through the answer. Again, feel free to put some of the answers in the chat wherever you can. Oh, I see. Is chat disabled? Okay, thanks. I didn't realize that. That's no problem. In which case then we can have a look at the answer here. So the answer would have been D, and I'm hoping you would have all kind of got towards D. And so the way that we would have gone about and done that is effectively we know that the working age population is 3.5 million, because that's you can read that off the graph. And then it tells you all percentage figures, or kind of all percentage figures from the chart must come from that number. And so for April, 4.5% of 3.5 million must be 157,500. And then for May, 2.5% is 87,500. And then for June, 3.5% must be 122,500. And so once you've got those numbers, you kind of add them together, and then you get 367,500. And obviously you'd want to then multiply that by 0.75%. Okay. Remember the trick that they're trying to do here is obviously the question's asking you for that quarter, right? And so it says, how many people were unemployed over the quarter using the updated calculation if we assume no one was unemployed? Now, the quarter of a year is going to not include July, okay? So January, February, March, then April, May, June. Does that make sense? And so that if you'd included July there, that's probably where you would have gone wrong. And so again, it's those sneaky unit tricks that I mentioned before, whereby they're trying to get you to do things like percentages, or kilograms versus grams and all those sort of things. Great. Okay, so the chat seems to now have been enabled. Perfect. So for the next ones, you guys can all put answers in the chat. Good. So, decision-making stuff. Can you explain how you worked out all the percentages? Yes, I can. So if we go back, so it tells you 1 in 4 of those previously classed as unemployed were not actively job seeking. Okay, and so it kind of so we get that 1 in 4, and then tells you the working age is 3.5 million. Okay, and so that 3.5 million is what we're going to be starting with, and so obviously we know that it's 3.5 million, and then the rest of it we basically work out from the from the chart or the graph. Okay, so it says for April. 4.5% of 3.5 million. So again, if you're looking at April, right, and then we're looking at unemployment, okay? So April unemployment's this line, that's where you get 45%. Can you see my cursor? Let me see if I can laser pointer. There we go. So you go to April here, go up to 4.5% on the unemployment line, right? And then you basically do 3.5 million multiplied by 0.0045. Okay. In this scenario, I would probably be wise to use the calculator unless you're very good at doing mental maths in your head. And then effectively you do the exact same thing for May, 2.5%. Again, this graph here, and then June 3.5%, and you do the same thing and then add them all together. Does that make sense? Let me try and see. Great. Do you get scrap paper for working out? So you get a whiteboard, and so you get a whiteboard that you're then able to utilize basically. And you can rub out things and that stuff. So yes, but it's not paper per se. Good. So the decision-making stuff, why do we have to multiply it by 0.75? Let me go back. So multiply it by 0.75 because it tells you 1 in 4 of those previously classed as unemployed were not actively job seeking. So we want the 3 in 4 that were job seeking, basically. And so that's why you multiply by 0.75. Because to get 3/4, basically. Okay, so decision making. Again, this one is you have slightly longer, so you have just under a minute per question here, okay? For the decision making section. And effectively here, there are various different types of questions. So you've got your Venn diagrams, you've got your logic probability questions. There's also syllogisms that can come up. And so I would expect a degree of maths to be needed for this section as well, particularly making sure that you're confident with things like conditional probabilities, and that you're confident with things like dice and cards and those sort of things, right? And those sort of probabilities, they're all going to be super helpful for you. And again, same thing for sort of logic puzzles, right? I want you to be comfortable with the idea of being able to draw out those puzzles, and just kind of visualize, have your own keys and things to visualize in your head, to make sure that you're comfortable with doing them all within that 1 minute. When it comes to argument, so there'll be some passages and then they'll ask you to evaluate the argument. I want to be super clear and say your opinion isn't what's relevant, right? They don't care for your opinion. What they care for is which argument is best supported by the passage. Okay. Um, and so what you want to do is you want to just look for the evidence for each argument in the passage and go based off that, not based off what you think is right or wrong personally, if that makes sense. Um, because that will vary between individuals, and the idea of this exam isn't to test your kind of opinions and your subjectivity. It's to test your ability to kind of identify strong and weak arguments for this particular question. And again, if you need to draw a Venn diagram, or if you need to draw probability trees or tree diagrams, don't feel like you need to fill everything in. Just fill out the relevant bits and make it as easy for yourself as possible. Okay, cool. Have a go at one of these syllogism questions and then see how you get on. So once you've started to get answers, feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, so I'm getting a variation between answer option B and D. Give it another few seconds just to get a few more responses, and then we can go through the answer. Okay, good. I like that there is confusion, because that means that then we can talk through it properly. Okay, so everybody's saying it's between B and D. Okay, cool. So, all ca yeah, okay. So I'm not even going to try and read through this. But effectively, the idea is that if we know that all cubes are clops, then we can do a big circle for clops and then a small circle for kilps, okay? Because we know that kilps must be a subset of clops, and because we know that not all clops can fizz, sorry, not all clops that can fizz are kilps. That then therefore means that we can draw this circle here and make sure that it's all overlaps kilps, because the next one says all kilps can fizz. So we know that the kilps must fizz, but not all clops must fizz, and therefore we must have this overlap. Okay? And then it says not all things that fizz are clops, and so we must know that then therefore there must be things that fizz that aren't clops, and because they're not clops, they're therefore also not kilps, and so that must be outside of here as well. Okay, so based on that, we then go back and then we can try and identify which of these things was most closely represented by the answer options, and you can see that will be D. Does that make sense? I appreciate that's quite a confusing explanation because everything sounds very similar. Um, but is everybody happy with that? Good. Okay. Um, Perfect. And so that's how, again, that's how I'd always approach these questions. Try and draw it out as simply as possible, and then go for which answer you think most resembles it or is the closest to it. Um, Last section, we're running quite ahead of schedule, which is good. The situational judgment section. So, this effectively is really asking you. just to assess what you would do in various situations from a moral perspective or an ethical perspective, and just, as a human, what would be the right thing to do in each of these scenarios. So there's a very good document by the General Medical Council. It's called Good Medical Practice. And that's effectively what these questions are based off. It's a very long document. It can be quite boring at times. However, it discusses all the relevant principles that these questions will be based off, and that you can. So once you've read it, you should have a very good idea of the basis that you need to answer these questions. So the idea is here, you always want to think like the perfect candidate, and you want to think like the perfect medical student or the perfect doctor, okay? I don't want you to say what you do in real life, because I know a lot of the time what we do in real life may not be exactly what is the most appropriate thing to do, right? For better or for worse, that is the reality. And so what I want you to be able to do is think like the ideal medical student or like the ideal doctor, and then choose the answer based on that, okay? So principles, like patient safety always comes first. Now that should be something that you're doing no matter what anyway. But patient safety will always come first in these questions. You should never, ever, ever lie in these questions. That's an automatic no. So that's an automatic, completely inappropriate thing to do in these questions. And always remember your role in these scenarios. So in each scenario, your role will be different. Okay, so sometimes you'll be a medical student, sometimes you'll be a friend, sometimes you'll be a doctor, sometimes you'll be a team leader. Sometimes you're not a team leader, and so you should know what your responsibilities are in each of those positions and what you're expected to be doing in each of those positions. Okay. Um, it says do not go nuclear unless absolutely necessary. So again, if things can be done privately, if things cannot be escalated, then always do that. Okay. Or escalate in privacy, escalate to the right person. Don't spread gossip. Again, all of those things are your bread and butter, essential things that you'd want to be doing. Okay. Cool. Um, Again, confidentiality is something you always want to keep. There are certain scenarios whereby you would want to break confidentiality. And so again, those are things that you can look at in your own time, or if anybody's got a few, then actually might be good to just have them in the chat now. Um, and so you can uh put through any reasons why you might want to break confidentiality as a doctor. Yeah, danger to someone else, safeguarding when there's harm to the patient. I agree. Judicial reasons. I agree. Uh, so in the question, sorry, if someone lies, what would be considered the most usually, yes, it would be considered the most inappropriate to answer if somebody lies. Yeah, so they're all good reasons. So if somebody's a danger to themselves or others, when there's direct harm to the patient, or yeah, things like if you're bound to by the law and things like that, I would agree. So you have to think that there's immediate danger to the patient, so not just kind of potential danger, but there must be immediate danger to the patient. That's a scenario where you tell somebody. If the patient is going to be harming somebody else and they have the intent to immediately harm somebody else, then you should break confidentiality. If you're suspecting things like acts of terror, then you should break confidentiality. Or in certain diseases, for example, if somebody presented with something like Ebola, or monkeypox, then those are notifiable diseases, and you have to tell by law. You have to tell Public Health England or whoever the relevant body is. Okay, good. So here's a practice question. Have a go, and again, once you have an answer, you can put it in the chat. Okay, so we're getting variations between C and D. Good. So, usually when these questions are marked, what happens is You can get correct marks or you can get partially correct marks, okay? And so if you're within the kind of correct half, so whether you're deciding if it's appropriate or very appropriate or inappropriate or very inappropriate, if you're within that correct half, you can get a half mark, okay? And then you'll get the full mark if you get the exact option correct. So in this scenario, hypothetically, if the answer was D and you put C, you would get half a mark. Whereas if the answer was C, but you put B, you wouldn't get any marks because you're not in the right half, if that makes sense. So let's have a read through the scenario. So you're a junior doctor and enter your ward one morning to overhear a consultant shouting at one of his elderly patients. His tone is very confrontational. The patient is confused and struggling to understand what the consultant is saying. How appropriate each of the following situations are. So wait for a more senior colleague to arrive to mention what you've heard. So I would agree that that is probably an inappropriate thing to do because there is active harm being done, and you do not want that active harm to be to continue, right? And so it's your responsibility to stop it. And so I wouldn't be putting A or B. I would be between C and D. Okay. Um, so yeah, I would be between C and D. Um, Inappropriate but not awful. It's hard to say because I'm kind of inclined to. Oh, what have they put? Oh, okay. So they put appropriate. Okay, fine. So basically, what they're trying to say is that it's appropriate to consult a senior colleague, but it's not appropriate to wait. And so what they're therefore saying is that actually because you're consulting a senior colleague, it's in this half, but because you're waiting, it's in this half. Okay. Um, to be honest, I'm inclined to think the other way. But I think that's more of maybe a personal opinion than it is a GMC opinion. And so maybe that's where you'd want to be really reading through those GMC good medical practice documents and making sure that you're super familiar with what that says. Okay. Um, but effectively their reasoning is that um it's not a very appropriate thing to do because of that element of waiting. Okay. And so that's why they would have gone for that option. Where can we find the documents? I think if you just Google GMC Good Medical Practice, it will come up. Okay, have a go at the second one. So I'm getting a lot of A's in the chat. Somebody said B. Yeah. So I'm inclined to agree. I would think A, because it gives you a way of diffusing the situation and offering to help, without being too confrontational or kind of escalating things. Although saying that, knowing my performance, it might not be that. But I would agree that it should be A or definitely A or B. Good. A very appropriate thing to do. And again, they're using the same reasoning that I'm sure all of us would have used. You know, patient safety is at risk. And so especially if the patient's vulnerable. So in this scenario, you can see the patient is confused and struggling to understand. So they may be delirious, they might have dementia, and so you're kind of worried in that scenario about the patient's well-being. And so actually by interrupting, you can stop this from happening any further, but you're also not calling out the consultant or you're not avoiding any unnecessary escalation at this moment in time. Okay, you can and should definitely escalate this issue later to the right person. But actually, the question is it appropriate to escalate it right now? And the answer to that is probably not. Good. So, in terms of overall things, effectively you want to learn the theory very thoroughly, and I think the Medic Portal has a very good kind of teaching series on this that you can look at. And then really it's a case of practice, practice, practice. Okay. So you want to practice under time pressure, you want to practice regularly every day. And you kind of want to use various different question banks. So the Medic Portal has a good question bank that you can use, but there are also other question banks that you can use that would really help you get used to the idea of the exam lay out the exam structure and how you can perform under time conditions, okay? Things that might happen on the day or things that might make you kind of miss um miss what you should be getting, right? The big one is the idea of cognitive load, okay? So you're trying out too many things right from the beginning and your brain can't really process all of them quickly enough, okay? And so in this scenario, what you want to do is you effectively want to focus on one thing at a time, right? And so at the start, just practice the theory and then do the questions untimed, making sure that you understand the tricks, making sure that you understand how to time save. And then once you're comfortable with all of that, then move on to that time practice. Okay. Don't just go straight into doing it all under exam conditions because you'll find it'll be very difficult and it will remain very difficult. So you kind of want to take it step by step and gradually get there. Okay. Um, and yeah, once you fully understand the theory, that's where you can then move on to those question banks, okay? And again, I would segment your practice. So I would do, a couple of hours, maybe an hour at a time or 2 hours at a time, and then take a big break and then come back and do another hour or two, right? So maybe, 2 sessions or 3 sessions a day, but making sure that you're fresh for each of those sessions because it's very quick. It's very easy and very quick to get fatigued in this exam, okay? Especially when you're practicing and you need to be sharp to be able to do it all under time conditions. Again, once you're familiar with doing some questions of time conditions, that's where you can then move on to doing mocks, okay? And so I would recommend doing maybe a mock a week, just making sure that you're familiar with doing that whole exam 2 hours in, getting you good exposure, and then you can measure your scores and how you're doing and how you're improving, um, and just adjust your overall time management accordingly. Okay. So how long is too long? So, Simon, who is excellent, is the head of academia at Medical Portal, says that you should do or aim to do around 40 to 70 hours, to prepare, for the exam. Naturally, some people take more, some people take less. It's a good range to work toward. And again, I would say don't do 40 hours in one week or 70 hours in one week. Split it up and do, like I say, 2, 3 hours a day for X amount of days, right? And that will give you a good indication of how long to learn things for. Okay. So any questions? I'm happy to take them again. I think this is um a little promo code that you guys can use for the webinar. For the question bank. So you can get 2 weeks free for the question bank, which is good. Through the UCAT Crammer. And then you can also get any 10% off any purchase with that code there. So UCAT Intro Webinar 26, all caps. Cool. Um, so I'm happy to take any questions in the Q&A now. So somebody says, how many hours of UCAT revision is recommended in total to obtain a high UCAT score? And when is the best time to book the UCAT? And when should we start revision for it? So, how many hours of UCAT revision is recommended in total? Well, like I say, Simon says 40, 70 hours. Some people need more, some people need less, but that's what you should start with and then go from there, accordingly. When is the best time to book it? I would book it as soon as you can, as soon as the window opens, but you can book it for a later date. So it's completely up to you, but I would allocate sufficient time, at least 3, 4, 5 weeks of dedicated prep, and then you can sit the exam, okay? So don't try and book it, next week, but try and book it with sufficient time for you to be able to have prepped. When should we start revision for it? Really, as soon as you're done with all of your AS or A-level exams, and as soon as you kind of got that time to be able to dedicate, let's say, 4 hours a day or 5 hours a day to it, is when you can start revising for it. Good. Oh, I see. So that question has been answered. So I'm just going to say done. Any other questions you can put in the Q&A and I'll happily answer them. For mock tests using MedEntry and Medify, for example, compared to the UCAS, how different are they? Compared to the UCAT, how different are they to the real exam? What websites in general will be more closely accurate to the UCAT website exam? other than the UCAT website itself or the ones I mentioned. So, of course, the UCAT website itself is going to be the most accurate one, because they are real questions from the real thing. Naturally, I'm going to say the Medic Portal question bank is also going to be a good resource for you to use, because again, a lot of those questions are quite similar to the exam and they'd be worthwhile doing. When I sat the exam, which was a long time ago now, the only available question bank was Medify. So at that time, Medic Portal didn't have one, nor did MedEntry. MedEntry wasn't really a thing back then, and so I used Medify exclusively, and that was very good at the time. But yeah, so I would say stick to the official UCAT questions, Medic Portal question bank, and potentially something like Medify or MedEntry. Um, cool. What would you recommend using to sharpen skills with maths? That's a good question. Um, I think as you're doing the questions, through these question banks, you'll be coming up across a lot of maths questions, and that's where you can start to sharpen up your skills. But before that, just practice memorizing your times tables, practice, your decimals, fractions, percentages from 1 through to 10 or whatever it is, right? So 1 over 10, 1 over 11, 1 over 12, whatever it is, and just practice kind of memorizing those. And then start doing questions, and then as you're doing the questions, you can take it from there, and practice them under time conditions, practice them without the calculator, and then naturally that will sharpen your skills. Um, what section do most people struggle with the most? Uh, so that's a difficult question to answer because everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses. I think that the most time pressure section is the verbal reasoning, and so I think probably verbal reasoning is the most difficult or the one that people find the hardest. But that's purely because of time pressure as opposed to anything else. Um, what stage of our revision should we currently be on, and how much time slash how many weeks should we spend on each stage of our revision? Um, so it depends. There'll be some of you that have started revision and will be looking to sit the exam in 2 weeks. There'll be others that haven't even thought about the UCAT yet and will start their revision in August and then want to sit the exam in September. Neither is correct. Neither is better or worse. And so I think comparing yourself to others at the minute isn't really super useful. Set out a timeline for yourself and try and stick to that timeline is what I would recommend. Um, Likewise, in terms of time, weeks for each stage of your revision. So maybe I would say I would spend the first week just familiarizing yourself with content and teaching yourself the content. And then the next week I would do practice, timed practice, and then you can start doing a mock a week or 2 mocks a week with time practice. And then hopefully you'll be ready for the exam sooner. Yeah, quite soon after that. Um, Next one, where slash how do we learn the theory for the question types? So I would recommend, like I said, the Medic Portal has a good teaching series. I know there's a good Medic Portal online course that will go through the theory for the question types. I'm sure other websites and other question banks, and there's loads of YouTube videos that you can watch that will also have different theory for the different UCAT question types and different tips and tricks that you can look at. But what I would say is, pick a resource or two and stick to them and see them through. Uh, to start revision now, do you think doing untimed questions for each individual section, like syllogisms, for example, decision making every day is a good thing to do? How do you recommend starting revision now and do little and often things? Yeah, so I would say that's a reasonable way of doing things now. So I would maybe say day one you want to do, or not day one, but block one of day one, so 2 hours you want to do syllogisms or decision making. Then block two of the day you can move on to verbal reasoning. Then block three you can do quantitative reasoning, and then do that for a week. Switch up the question types each time, and then after that first week, you'll have covered all the question types in each of the sections. Then you can just start doing practice of each section, and then progress like that. But yeah, little and often is definitely what I'd recommend. So good. Um, what methods did you use when choosing diagrams for most helpful decision-making questions, such as Venn diagram questions? So, when you're doing those questions, um, basically a diagram is only as good as your interpretation of it. Okay? So effectively, figure out a system that works for you, even if it's complete gibberish to me. Because as long as it works for you and you understand the key behind it and you understand how quickly you can interpret it, that's all that matters, okay? And so for me, usually what ends up happening is for each different question, I'll just work out what I think would be most appropriate for that individual question, okay? So in the example that we did, obviously that kind of required you to draw a Venn diagram, so you didn't really have an option other than drawing it. But other questions, if, for example, if it's people sat around a dinner table, I'll draw out the dinner table and then annotate people that way, okay? Or, for example, if it's a map or things in relation to each other, I would kind of draw out a little northeast southwest map and plot things relative to each other that way. So it's very dependent on the sort of situation that you're getting. What would be classed as a good score for the UCAT this year? Well, that is variable depending on things like if you're an international or a local student or a home student. Depends on the university that you're applying to because different unis will use the UCAT differently. And so it's a hard question to answer because a good score for somebody applying to Oxford or Cambridge is going to be very different to a good score for somebody applying to somewhere like Cardiff, which doesn't necessarily look at the UCAT score as much. So what I'd recommend is I would recommend looking at the universities that you're interested in, seeing how they use the UCAT, and then working out what score you should be aiming for based on that. But there will be options for you in terms of medical and dental schools, no matter how you perform on the UCAT, okay? What score should we get on our final mock before attending test day? That is a comfortable and good position to be in. Again, so my question to that is unfortunately the same as before. It really depends on who you are and what sort of thing that you're aiming for, right? But it varies, I did better on test day than I did in my mocks. Other people will do the other way around, and so it's difficult to predict basically because no mock is going to be 100% predictive. And also, there are various different factors on the day that are going to be impacting how you perform. Okay, so the questions that come up, your nerves, various different things that will impact how you perform on the day. And so it's hard to gauge. But hopefully, you'll be getting a score similar to what you're expecting. Okay, good. So those are all the questions I
Should,
believe that have come up.
do you want to leave it? Should we do another minute just to see if there's anything else typing up and then we'll end the webinar? Is that okay, Barack?
Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, brilliant. We're almost coming up to a minute. So in that case, thank you so much, Barack. We really, really appreciate it. As mentioned at the start of the recording, this will be recorded and sent out to everyone over the next week. If you have any questions, please feel free to email info@themedicportal.com. But thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a lovely evening.
Bye bye now.
Thank you, Barack. Bye.